Welcome to the Odds Breakers, number one place for shared, sharp betting information.
All right, welcome back to podcast 44 of 2018. I'm your host, Kiev O'Neill. You can tweet me at The Public Dog, or you can tweet us at The Odds Breakers. If you are looking for a sports book, please visit our sponsor, mybookie.ag, to get a 100% sign-up bonus using the promo code TheOddsBreakers. Terms and conditions apply. If you'd like to help us out with our costs, we would love to help you out. Please visit theoddsbreakers.com, click on Patreon subscriber, and you will become an Odds Breakers member and get access to the show a little early, as well as our premium picks when we make the bets. Do not risk the line moves. If nothing else, please visit theoddsbreakers.com and become a free picks newsletter subscriber. My friends, we have a great show for you today. We have Mr. Brian Edwards from BrianEdwardsSports.com, Vegas Insider, to break down some college football as well as UFC 229, Khabib versus McGregor. We have Cub Fan Danny to break down the NFL, and we're also going to get his thoughts on UFC 229. But first, we're going to get into our picks, our free picks for college football week 6, and then we're going to get into the sharp line movements. You know, right now we are at this point of the season that returning production from last year doesn't really mean anything. Okay? You don't need to use that in your handicap anymore. There's enough current data out there from these games to get an accurate portrayal on how these, games will be played out from these teams. You still need to factor in their strength of schedule when handicapping, though, because they're barely into their conference play. And some teams had a very hard non-conference schedule, and some teams have had a very easy non-conference schedule. So you definitely have to factor some of that in. But without further ado, let's just get right into some of the games that I like and that I obviously put some plays on. Maryland versus Michigan, laying 17.5 at home. Michigan is. Now, I know DJ Durkin has been a huge distraction to this team. It started, in August. It kind of showed versus Temple. They blew that game. Maryland looked good against Texas, beating them, and, blew it against Temple. But I do think that they were penalized a little bit too much by the odds makers here. Okay? I mean, a pick six happened that game, kind of threw them off a little bit. We have to remember that Maryland does have Matt Canada. Okay, and I've seen Matt Canada in action. He was like the offensive coordinator on a bad 2012 Badgers team that took these players and brought them to a Big Ten championship. He kind of made something out of nothing. Now, I also like what Maryland's got going on rushing. They are averaging 6.2 yards per carry, led by Ty Johnson and Anthony McFarland. That's very high. That's like elite high right now. Now, I know their schedule hasn't been great, but they still, played, like I said, Texas, Minnesota is okay, Temple is okay, and of course Bowling Green was a tomato can. But, they're doing pretty well. On defense, they're allowing 4.45 yards per play for the opponents. The running game also opens up the passing game for Kasim Hill a little bit. Now, they haven't had to do that a lot, but, I've seen him in action before, and I know that he can pass the ball. On the other hand, let's talk about Michigan. Michigan destroyed some teams, right? But these are terrible, fast-playing teams like Nebraska and Western Michigan. They got way too much credit for that. Okay, they showed that last week against Northwestern, having to come back after almost losing outright. Michigan's stats have been padded by playing some of these very bad teams. SMU. So 6.3 yards per play on offense and allowing 3.5 yards per play on defense doesn't really show the real picture. It's skewed a bit. Defense was great, but that was a Notre Dame Wimbush team they played. It wasn't with Ian Book. Maryland can step up to the big games, as you've seen against Texas. They can do that. And what I really like here is that this is kind of a look-ahead spot for Michigan. They want revenge against Wisconsin from last year, and that's their very next game. So I have Michigan winning by 12.5 points. I don't have them winning by 17.5 points. So we are on Maryland plus 17.5 this week. Kentucky versus Texas A&M minus 5.5. Who's been the most surprising team in football? It certainly has been Kentucky this year. After beating Florida, after beating Mississippi State, after beating South Carolina, they're averaging 6.2 yards per play and allowing just 4.4 on defense. Kentucky's a top 20 team against the pass, while Texas A&M ranks 104th. What I really like about Kentucky is that they are 4th in the nation in opponents' yards per point at 21.5. They don't allow teams to score. That they have a very good red zone efficiency. I believe they're in the top 30 for that, actually. Now, I know A&M has played Clemson and Bama, okay? But I think they got a little too much credit for almost beating a Clemson team that looks a little down this year. Their secondary is a little questionable. Their defensive line's amazing. Their quarterback was healthy during that game, and their quarterbacks. The Aggies do have a good offense, averaging 6.6 yards per play, but they also give up 6.2 yards per play. That doesn't bode well. They also have turnover issues. The Arkansas game last week kind of said a lot to me. They only won by 1 touchdown here. Arkansas is a terrible team. I think this game should have been more of a pick'em against Kentucky. Okay, laying 5.5 is a little bit too much. Kentucky might be a public dog here, but I am on Kentucky all the way down to +3 personally. So I'm taking my chances with Kentucky and might as well sprinkle that money line as well. Kentucky, well-coached team. Huge credit to Mark Stoops for that. Syracuse versus Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's giving 5 points at home. Okay, this line is wrong. I don't care how well Pittsburgh plays at home. This Pitt team is bad and can only handle the bad teams of the FBS. They average 22 points a game at 5.5 yards per play. It's pretty low, 22 a game. While Syracuse averages 44 points a game and 6 yards per play. Syracuse played some pretty tough opponents. Pittsburgh's played Penn State, of course, and, they had a couple tough opponents, but so is Syracuse here. On defense, Syracuse also has the edge, allowing 5.8 yards per play to Pittsburgh's 6.3. That's a half a yard difference. That's pretty big per play. Now, Pitt has played, like I said, a tougher schedule at this point, but they couldn't, when they played the tough teams like Central Florida and Pittsburgh, or at Penn State, they couldn't score more than 6 points at home against Penn State and 14 points against Central Florida, okay? And Central Florida's defense isn't the greatest. They rely on their offense. The Panthers really benefited when they played a weakened North Carolina team with guys on suspension, so it kind of padded their stats a little bit. and a really bad Georgia Tech triple option team. Georgia Tech's defense is pretty bad, as we have seen. So I'm liking Syracuse here to cover this. I think I like Syracuse all the way up to 7. I'm taking Syracuse -5. Kansas State versus Baylor, laying 3 points. Well, it was laying for 3 when the lines opened up. It's at 4.5 now. I got this one early, but I like it all the way to 6. K-State is not the same K-State of recent years. They only average 3.6 yards per rush, which is 1.3 yards worse than last year, and 1.6 yards per rush worse than 2016. That's bad for a Schneider team, okay? Skylar Thompson's passer rating is also a pretty dismal 129. In college it goes up to like 250. That ranks 88th in college football. Baylor just got done playing powerhouse Oklahoma and is now more game tested for this week. Baylor's Charlie Brewer is an okay passer, 143.5 rating. He's pretty good, but the key to this game is that Baylor can move the ball. They are 11th in pace, and they're averaging 167 more yards per game than K-State. 167 more yards per game. That's about 10 or 15 points worth of yards. Both defense match up pretty close. They both give up about 5.3 yards per run. They both gave up about 1,150 passing yards this year. They're pretty close on defense. So definite big edge to Baylor here. I'm loving Baylor all the way up to 6 or 7 at least here. Baylor -3, -4.5, whatever it is now. Notre Dame versus Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech is dogs +5.5 at home. The over-under is now 57. So we know that Notre Dame is playing a much better game with Ian Book. Showed well last week versus Stanford. We talked about that. But now it's time for the old letdown spot. And we love to look at that, don't we? The question is, how much can they let down at Virginia Tech? Brian Willis came out firing versus Duke for the Hokies, passing 17 for 27, 332 yards, and 3 TDs. Well, Duke came out kind of flat, but my question is, how much of that flatness was Virginia Tech's great defense? I want to know that, Let's look at some of the other games. I think this Tech defense didn't take Old Dominion seriously. That's why they allowed 49 points against this terrible Old Dominion team. Plus, Old Dominion was playing out of their minds. It was their Super Bowls, kind of like how BYU played Wisconsin. Sometimes they just play at the extra level, right? And I think that's what's happened here. So, hell, maybe Virginia Tech went out the night before. Maybe the kids went out and partied when they were visited at school. Who knows? But Tech's defense would definitely look way better if it wasn't for that, terrible Old Dominion game. But even after that, they still only allowed 20 points per game with that. And I think it's more like 12 without that game. Notre Dame, on the other hand, allows only 4.5 yards per play and 19 points per game. And they played a pretty good schedule. Both teams play at a slightly above average pace of play. But I think with the letdown spot for the Irish and how much this game means to the Hokies, that points are going to come at a premium. These are two of the best defenses, I think, in college football. I'm taking the under. Notre Dame, under 57 points. I'm actually surprised it went up. I hit it when it was a little bit under that, but I hit it again. Under 57 points. SMU versus Central Florida. Well, if you know anything about these teams, then I probably don't even have to tell you what I'm going to do here, right? If you know anything about this podcast, I don't have to tell you. Yeah. Central Florida plays at a very fast pace, 77 plays per game, and it would actually be a lot faster if they quit blowing out some of these teams.